have to change the system. We have to straighten out what's going on in these courts. We got a rigged deal going, this whole country, and we've got to do it. And those appellate courts have to step up and straighten things out, or we're not going to have a country any longer. This election coming up on November 5th, 2024, is going to go down as the most important day, because if we don't win, it's all of us, it's millions of people. If we don't win, this country is finished.
Country is finished if he doesn't win an election. Donald Trump at a rally in Arizona last night, offering his dim view of America, claiming the whole country is rigged against him, giving an ominous warning about America's future if he does not defeat President Biden in November. Our next guest argues the division we're seeing in America right now, not really a product of our times, it's actually part of the fabric of our country's history. Joining us now, former BBC foreign correspondent Nick Bryant, who spent years reporting from Washington. He's the author of the new book, The Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself. Nick, good morning. It's good to have you back with us. So tell us more about your thesis here and how far back you think this stretches for America.
My thesis, Willie, is that Donald Trump is as much a product of American history as John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, or Joe Biden. It's just a history that we tend to forget, misremember, or deliberately erase. What it also argues is that you're in this forever war, an unending conflict, because so much of that history is unresolved. You have an unending conflict about abortion. You have an unending conflict about guns. You have an unending conflict about race. So much of the history is unresolved. And what I also say is division has so often been the default. If you go back to the founding days of the Republic, victory over the British brought independence, but it didn't bring an instant sense of nationhood. It wasn't till about 50 years later that America really had a national consciousness. America has always been divided, and we are seeing those divisions play out now.
Nick, it's Richard Haass. It just seems to me what you're offering up as a true glass half empty view of this country. Of course there's divisions. Of course there's differences. First of all, tell me the society or country that doesn't have them. And what marks a country, I would argue, is not the absence of differences, it's the ability to deal with them. And someone could say, other than the Civil War, we've got a pretty decent record over 2.5 centuries of dealing with our differences, dealing with our divisions. So why are you treating us so negatively and, if you will, so differently from your own country or any other?
Richard, I think there are a few countries that contest their history so fiercely. There's America. I think there are a few countries that are still arguing over the rules of democracy, advanced countries that are literally arguing over the rules of democracy. I love America. I'm not one of those Europeans that knocks America. I feel more comfortable in America than I do in my homeland of Britain. I have a daughter who is American. She is already showing signs of being a bona fide New Yorker, and I absolutely love that. I've always somebody who's told a great story about America. But as a BBC correspondent in the Trump era, that story became very hard to tell because the news cycle almost seemed like a history cycle in microcosm. Constant arguments over guns, constant arguments over race, constant arguments over the apportionment of power between the president, the judiciary and the legislature. These are arguments that have always been there. You talk about slavery and things were sorted out after that, but the way that was sorted out, Richard, as you know, was to have segregation in the South. And what worries me now is that what was always been a beacon of democracy looks increasingly to the rest of the world more like a dumpster fire, and that pains me to say it as somebody who deeply loves your country.
Actually, I'm going to push back again. If we're such a dumpster fire, why do you have so many people wanting to come to this country? I would think people are voting with their feet. That's a market. Again, if you think about the Constitution, it was described by one great scholar as an invitation for the struggle in my area over the course of American foreign policy. Again, it almost seems to me you're as the Brits would say, you're trailing your cape. You're looking for a fight here when in fact one doesn't exist. The idea that we have tensions in our society, I would say, is healthy. The whole idea of checks and balances. We want to institutionalize tensions. And again, but you talked about race, but then we had the civil rights movement. That seems to me a really good example of a society that recognizes its divisions and then has not solved them, but has dealt with them, I think, remarkably well.
Richard, I did my doctoral thesis on the civil rights movement. I know about the reforms of the civil rights movement, the dismantlement of segregation in 1964, the Voting Rights Act in 1965. But what happened as soon as the ink on that document was dried? The assault on democracy began again. People were trying to stop people of color from voting. And this was something that went on decades. Indeed, you know, January the 6th, in many ways, was the culmination of an assault on democracy that has been going on for decades. And democracy was not that strong in the first place. One of the reasons why American democracy is frail, because the founding fathers did not intend it to be that strong. They were not in favor of a mass democracy. They saw the body politic as something that should be constrained in an intricately designed straitjacket, which is why you had things like the Electoral College and why you had counter-majoritarian mechanisms like the Senate. One of the reasons why democracy is frail right now, because it wasn't that strong in the first place.
Nick, I get your argument, and it certainly is true that when there is an advance, like the civil rights movement, the election of the first African-American president is the most recent example. There is a backlash, and there is, and that issue essentially is fought again. But you know, if you study the civil rights movement, you know of Dr. King's famous quote, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Do you accept that argument that American history is, yes, it is, you know, 3 steps forward and at least 2 steps back, and another 3 steps sideways, and then maybe we go forward again, but that it ratchets eventually toward greater freedom, greater inclusion, and you know, there was a time when this country was only for, you know, white men who owned property, and you know, African American men could theoretically vote at least, and then women could vote, and then, you know, it's so would you buy the argument that, yeah, it's more of a ratcheting process that's messy and scratchy, but that when you look back over the span of 50 years or 100 years, you have moved, you have gotten someplace?
The grand narrative of American history, as you say, Eugene, is one of progress and advancement with occasional setbacks. And nothing speaks more of that than race. And I think that was why Donald Trump's victory in 2016 was so shocking in many ways. There was an assumption, maybe, that America's first African-American president, what a breakthrough that was. It almost felt to me like an end of history moment. But it wasn't the end of American history. There was a feeling that Obama might be followed into office by America's first female president. Again, this idea of progress and advancement. But what happened instead, of course, was you got a racist misogynist as president. And now, even after January the 6th, when an American sitting president incited insurrectionists to storm the Capitol to try and overturn a clear-cut presidential result, he is still the Republican nominee. And what happened after those insurrectionists were cleared from Capitol Hill? So many Republican lawmakers went back into the chambers where they'd run for their lives and voted again to challenge and overturn the election. Now, that does not look like progress to me. That looks like a major setback. And I think Trump's victory almost challenged our historical belief system about America. And that, in many ways, is what the forever war, America's unending conflict with itself, is about.
A spirited debate about the new book, The Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself. One I figure we will continue in the weeks and months to come. Come back and see us. Nick Bryant, thanks so much. We appreciate it.